When I announced my wedding to the family, I never imagined it would turn into a battle between me and my sister. It all started with the simplest choices for the wedding, but quickly escalated into hurtful and offensive comments. She said things I couldn't believe, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. But perhaps the price to pay for the truth will change everything forever. I had been dreaming of my wedding day for as long as I could remember. It was going to be the perfect celebration, a moment to cherish forever. I had chosen September not just because it was a beautiful month, but because it marked the anniversary of when I first met my fiancé. The symbolism felt right. It felt like the stars had aligned, and I couldn't have been more excited. The thought of finally getting married to the love of my life was exhilarating. But as soon as I shared the news with my family, things took a turn. My sister Kat, who was supposed to have her wedding 5 years ago, seemed to pull away. I could feel the sadness in her eyes, though she didn't say much. After losing her partner in a tragic motorcycle accident, I knew she had been struggling. The weight of her grief seemed to linger over everything, even her relationships. She had been in therapy on and off, trying to heal, but I could see the pain in her that hadn't faded. When my mother asked me to involve Kat in the wedding planning to make her feel included, I hesitated. I wanted her to be a part of it, but I didn't know how to navigate her pain. Still, I thought it was the right thing to do. So I tried to listen to her opinions. But as we began discussing the details, I started to feel the tension build. Kat was visibly unhappy with many of my choices. She didn't approve of the month I'd chosen for the wedding, dismissing it as a bad time for such an event. I tried to explain that it meant something special to me, but she didn't seem to care. Then, there were the colors. I had chosen a palette that felt elegant and personal, but Kat seemed to think it was too bold, too much. Her disapproval was palpable, and her comments were laced with a bitterness I hadn't expected. It felt like no matter what I chose, she would find a way to criticize. I did my best to keep calm, even as her words stung, but the comment that truly shook me came when we were talking about my father walking me down the aisle. With tears in her eyes, Kat said, "I can't believe you'll be the first daughter my father is going to walk down the aisle." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and it hit me like a punch in the gut. I had always known that Kat's grief ran deep, but hearing her say that made me feel like a stranger in my own family. It wasn't just her sadness that I was dealing with, it was this unspoken resentment that felt so heavy. I didn't know how to respond to her. Part of me wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the right words. It wasn't that I didn't understand her pain, I did, but it felt as though no matter how much I tried to include her, her sorrow was too overpowering to let me share in the joy of my own moment. The more I tried to include her, the more I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Her negativity was starting to overshadow everything. And then, things took an even more uncomfortable turn when I started planning the bridesmaid dresses. I had an idea to let each bridesmaid choose a different color dress, something that reflected their personality. My best friend had suggested it, and I loved the idea. But when I mentioned it to Kat, she immediately rejected it. Her response wasn't just a critique. It was cruel. "It'll look like a gay pride parade," she said. "You're turning your wedding into a gay wedding by listening to all your friends' suggestions." Her words felt like a slap in the face. I knew my best friend was gay, but I never expected Kat to lash out in such a hurtful way. I was trying to make the day about who I was, about what made me happy, but Kat's words seemed to cast a dark cloud over everything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my excitement was slowly being replaced with dread. I knew I had to stand my ground, but I didn't expect it to be this difficult. The wedding was supposed to be my celebration, but I was beginning to feel like it was a battleground. Kat's attitude toward my wedding seemed to grow darker with each passing day. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me felt like my wedding wasn't just a celebration of love. It had become a reflection of everything she had lost. Every time I tried to share my excitement with her, her sadness, anger, and jealousy would pour out. The tension was palpable, and I couldn't understand why it was affecting me so deeply. The reality of what Kat had gone through hit me harder with every conversation. I had always known that her fiancé's death had devastated her, but I didn't realize how much it had shaped who she was now. She seemed to live in the shadow of that loss, as though she couldn't escape it. It wasn't just her relationships that had faltered. It was her entire outlook on life. Nothing seemed to bring her joy anymore. And yet, I could tell she was still clinging to the memory of what could have been. Every time she spoke about weddings or love, I could hear the bitterness in her voice, as though she was grieving something she would never get back. But I was tired of walking on eggshells. This was supposed to be my moment. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of preserving her fragile emotions. I had tried to be understanding, to make her feel included, but it felt like no matter what I did, it was never enough. It didn't matter that I had chosen the wedding month with meaning or that I had picked colors and themes that reflected who I was. Nothing seemed to matter. When Kat expressed her disapproval of my wedding planning, it went beyond just the details. It became personal. Her words were cutting and felt like a constant reminder that her sorrow had to take center stage. I had hoped that time would have healed her wounds, but it seemed like she was stuck in a place of perpetual grief, unwilling or unable to move forward. I tried to reason with her. I wanted to understand her pain, and I asked her about it once, sitting with her on the porch one evening. I wanted her to know I wasn't trying to replace what she had lost or diminish her grief. But when I asked if she was okay, she just shook her head and muttered something about how no one would ever understand the kind of loss she had experienced. That was the moment I realized that no matter how much I tried to reach out, no matter how much I wanted to include her in my special day, it was never going to be enough for her. There was a deep part of me that understood her, but the more I thought about it, the more I saw how her pain was preventing her from seeing my happiness. I wasn't asking her to move on, but I did expect her to respect my decisions. It wasn't her wedding, and it wasn't fair for her to make me feel guilty about every little choice I made. But her grief had a way of overshadowing everything, and I found myself giving in just to keep the peace, even when it meant sacrificing my own joy. Yet the more I tried to accommodate her, the more I felt like I was losing myself. This wasn't the relationship I wanted with my sister, not one built on guilt or resentment. I had done everything I could to make her feel included, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it would never be enough for her. She wasn't just mourning a partner, she was mourning her own version of happiness, and that was something I could never give back to her. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe she didn't even want my help. She just wanted to be miserable, locked in the past. And if that was true, there was nothing I could do to change it. The tension between Kat and me only escalated as the days went by. I had tried to keep the peace, to make sure my wedding plans didn't upset her too much. But it seemed that no matter what I did, she would find something to criticize. I couldn't help but feel like I was walking a fine line, balancing my excitement for my wedding with the weight of her constant disapproval. It wasn't just the colors or the details anymore. It was as though she was attacking my very decision to get married at all. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to make some decisions about my bridal party. I had decided to let my bridesmaids choose their own dresses in different colors, something that felt personal and reflective of their individuality. My best friend had been instrumental in helping me shape this vision, suggesting the idea of allowing everyone to express themselves. I loved the idea. It felt fun and free, and it matched my own personality. But when I shared the plan with Kat, her response was harsh and immediate. Her face contorted in disbelief. "It'll look like a gay pride parade," she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're turning your wedding into a gay wedding by listening to all your friends' suggestions." I was taken aback by her comment. I had never expected her to be so openly dismissive, especially when it came to my best friend, who was gay. His opinions had always mattered to me, not because of his sexual orientation, but because he truly understood my tastes and shared my vision. But to Kat, it seemed that anything that wasn't traditional was automatically wrong. And it was as though she was accusing me of betraying everything I had ever known just to appease my friends. Her words struck me harder than I cared to admit. I had been trying so hard to include her, to show her that I wanted her to be part of my special day. But now it felt like she was rejecting everything I stood for. It wasn't just the dresses. It was the idea that I was trying to create something unique and meaningful for myself. I had never intended to disrespect her or what she had been through, but it was becoming clear that no matter what I did, she wasn't going to be happy with it. Why do you care so much? I found myself asking, the frustration bubbling to the surface. It's my wedding, not yours. Why can't you just let me be happy? The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted it. But the truth was, I was tired. Tired of tiptoeing around her grief. Tired of feeling like my every choice was being scrutinized through the lens of her pain. I wanted her to be happy for me, but it felt like she was more focused on her own unresolved emotions than celebrating my joy. The next few days were filled with a heavy silence. Kat avoided me at all costs, and when I entered a room, she would leave. It was like she was trying to punish me, trying to make me feel as uncomfortable as possible. And I too was left wondering if this was what my wedding had come to, just another battlefield where no one could win. The days following our argument were some of the hardest I'd faced in a long time. Kat wouldn't speak to me, and every time I entered a room, she would walk out, as if I was the one who had caused all this tension. I tried to be the bigger person, tried to reach out, to make things right, but nothing worked. It felt like we were two strangers passing each other in the halls of our own home, avoiding eye contact, pretending the other didn't exist. It hurt more than I cared to admit, but I was beginning to realize that this wasn't just about my wedding anymore. Something deeper had been broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It wasn't long before my mom intervened. She came to me one evening after dinner, sitting me down in the kitchen. "You need to apologize," she said softly, looking at me with that concerned expression she always wore when things were tense. "Kat's been through so much. This wedding, all the excitement around it, it's bringing up feelings she's not ready to deal with. You know how fragile she is right now. She's hurting." I sighed, the weight of it all sinking in. "I don't want to apologize, Mom. Not when I feel like I'm being attacked for making choices that are important to me. I tried to include her. I've listened to her, but she just keeps tearing everything down." My mom's face softened, and she reached across the table, placing a hand on mine. "I know, sweetie. I know, but you also need to understand how deep her grief runs. She's not just upset about the wedding. She's upset because everything in her life feels like it's falling apart, and now it feels like you're moving forward and leaving her behind." I wanted to argue, to tell her that Kat's grief didn't give her the right to make me feel guilty for wanting my own happiness. But as my mom spoke, something shifted inside me. I knew that Kat was suffering, but the weight of her grief had begun to feel like it was overshadowing everything. I couldn't keep sacrificing my joy for her pain. But was I wrong to want something for myself? My mom looked at me as though reading my mind. "You need to go to her. Apologize, even if you don't think you're in the wrong. You need to make her understand that you're not trying to hurt her, but at the same time, you need to stand firm in your decisions. This is your life, your wedding." I was torn. My heart ached for Kat, but I also felt frustrated, exhausted by the constant battle. I didn't know if I could continue giving in to her, if I could keep letting her emotions dictate everything I did. But my mom was right. If there was any chance of healing this rift, I had to try. I found Kat in her room that night, curled up on her bed with a book in her hands, though I knew she wasn't really reading. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red from crying, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then I walked over and sat on the edge of her bed, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry," I began, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "I shouldn't have yelled at you. I know you're hurting, and I didn't mean to make it worse. But this is my wedding, Kat. It's supposed to be a happy time, and I need you to understand that. I need you to let me have this." She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the wall. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the hurt and the anger. "I know," she whispered after a long pause. I don't know how to deal with it. I'm not ready to see you move on while I'm still stuck." I felt my heart break a little more as I listened to her words. It was like everything she had been holding inside came pouring out. I don't want to leave you behind, Kat. I never have. But I can't keep living in your shadow either. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't look away. She seemed to soften, just a little. I'm sorry, too, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be happy for you. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I know it's hard, but you can still be a part of my life, Kat. You're my sister. You always will be. There was silence between us for a moment, and though things weren't completely fixed, I could feel a small shift. It wasn't a perfect solution, and I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were both trying to understand each other. As I left her room that night, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make her pain go away. But I could still hope for healing. For both of us. The days following my conversation with Kat felt strangely calm. I had apologized and we had finally talked, really talked about her grief, my wedding, and how both of us were struggling to find common ground. I could tell that something had shifted between us, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. The emotional wall that had divided us still felt very real, and though she hadn't explicitly said it, I knew she wasn't completely ready to let go of the hurt. It seemed like she was waiting for me to do something more, but I wasn't sure what that something was. But despite our talk, things at home weren't entirely back to normal. A sense of unease lingered in the air, especially whenever we were in the same room. I would try to make small talk with Kat, but her responses were brief, her eyes distant, and it felt like we were both pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I tried not to let it affect me too much, but the silence was deafening. Every time she walked out of the room when I entered, it felt like a punch to my stomach. She wasn't even pretending to be okay anymore. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, my mom came in and sat down across from me. She looked at me with a serious expression, her brow furrowed. I had a feeling that she was about to say something I wouldn't want to hear. You need to do something, Hin, she began, her tone soft but firm. Kat won't be at your wedding unless you make things right. She told me she won't come. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. What? She said she won't come? I couldn't believe it. After everything we had talked about after the apology, I thought we were making progress. I don't understand. We had a good conversation, I thought. She's still hurting, Hin, my mom said quietly, but there's more to it. She feels like you've chosen your happiness over her, like you're leaving her behind. I sat there, my mind racing. How had it come to this? I had tried everything, listening, apologizing, understanding, but in Kat's eyes it was never enough. It felt like no matter what I did, I was always the one who had to make compromises while she remained stuck in her grief. I don't know what else to do, Mom. I've tried to make her feel included. I've done everything I can think of. I can't keep walking on eggshells around her. My mom sighed, her face softening with sympathy. I know, sweetie. But you have to make a decision. You can't let her destroy this moment for you. It's your wedding, and you deserve to be happy. Her words echoed in my mind as I lay in bed that night, trying to sort through my feelings. I had always thought that family should come first, but this was my day, my future, and I couldn't let Kat's pain overshadow that. I had already apologized, but it seemed like it wasn't enough. It was as if she wanted me to keep apologizing for the rest of my life, as though nothing I did could ever erase her loss. But I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness, my future, for someone else's grief. I made a decision. The next morning I went to Kat's room, my heart heavy with uncertainty. I knocked on the door before stepping inside. She was sitting on her bed, staring out the window, and didn't even look up when I entered. Kat, I began, my voice shaky, I need you to come to my wedding. She didn't respond immediately, and for a moment I wondered if she'd even heard me. But then she slowly turned to face me, her expression unreadable. I can't, Hin, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't watch you move on, knowing that I'll never have what you have. I can't be happy for you when I feel like I've lost everything. My heart ached for her. I understood her pain, I really did. But I couldn't keep letting it dictate my life. I know you're hurting, but I can't let you keep holding me back. This is my life, my wedding, and I need you to be there. I need you to be a part of it. The silence stretched between us. and I wasn't sure if she was going to respond. But then she sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'll come, but don't expect me to pretend that I'm okay." I nodded, relieved that she was willing to come, even if it wasn't with full support. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. As I left her room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but I also knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Kat's grief wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, but for now, I could only hope that one day she would find a way to heal, and that our relationship would find its way back to where it used to be.